I was still in the desert when the email came through. 13 years of marriage ended in a PDF attachment. My name is Nathan, 42 years old, Staff Sergeant with the 82nd Airborne, and that was how my life fell apart. I never imagined betrayal could arrive with a subject line. But that morning, in Kandahar, I opened my laptop, and my marriage ended in 5 words. The air in the barracks was already heavy with dust, that kind of grit that never leaves your mouth no matter how much water you drink. My squad was laughing 2 bunks over, trading stories to fill the silence between mortar drills, and for one rare second I thought maybe today would just be another day. Then I saw it. "We're done," I filed. No greeting, no explanation. Just a blade slid between my ribs, courtesy of my wife, Becky. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, trying to will them into saying something else. I jumped out of planes, crawled through mud, stared down men who wanted me dead, but nothing prepared me for 5 words on a glowing screen. My hands went cold even though the desert outside was pushing 110. I scrolled, desperate for something. Maybe she'd explain, maybe she'd soften it. Instead, the details came clinical, detached. She'd already filed for divorce. She'd already drained our accounts. She'd already changed the locks. It wasn't a conversation. It was a notification. The sound of gunfire cracked in the distance, but it felt quieter than the silence in my chest. 4 months deployed, counting down the days to get back home, and in one email, there was no home left to return to. I wanted to shout. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, tear something apart. But in combat, weakness is dangerous. If the men saw me unravel, if I lost focus even for a second, that could cost lives. So I sat there, stone-faced, staring at that email as if I could burn a hole through it with disco, Ipline alone. Inside, I was falling apart. Every memory of Becky, her laugh, the way she used to leave notes in my rucksack before training ops, the promise that we'd always fight for each other. All of it collapsed in on itself. And the worst part? I couldn't even ask her why. Thousands of miles away, I had no voice, no recourse, just silence, and the sandstorm outside. But anger has a way of sharpening you. While she thought she'd cut me out clean, she underestimated the one thing the Army had drilled into me. Nothing disappears without a trace. And in her rush to erase me, Becky left behind a trail I could follow. On the battlefield, silence saves lives. Back home, Becky mistook my silence for weakness. In the barracks, I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I folded the pain into a quiet corner of myself, the way we're trained to tuck fear away before jumping out of a plane. The guys noticed the change, of course. A few glances lingered a second too long, like they were waiting for me to crack. But no one asked. Out here, everyone carries their own ghosts. Mine just happened to wear Becky's face. At night, when the camp finally went still, I replayed every sign I had ignored. The late nights back home when she swore she was catching up on work. The sudden withdrawals from our joint account that she brushed off as bills. The whispered phone calls I caught just before deployment, the ones she said were just her sister. I didn't want to believe it then. I told myself I was imagining shadows, but now, the shadows had names, and they'd gutted $60,000 straight from under me. The cruelest part? She knew I couldn't fight back. A divorce filing is just paper, but when you're halfway across the world with bullets flying overhead, it's a loaded gun you can't grab. She wanted me cornered, silent, powerless. But silence isn't surrender. Silence is a weapon if you know how to use it. So I waited. I performed my duties with precision, kept my uniform tight, my salute crisp. On the outside, I was still Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole, steady and reliable. Inside, I was cataloging every detail, every inconsistency, every trail she thought she'd covered. Anger came in waves, yes, but so did clarity, and the Army had taught me patience. You don't strike when the enemy expects it. You strike when their guard is down, when they've convinced themselves you're beaten. Becky thought she had erased me, turned me into a ghost she no longer had to reckon with. But she didn't know that silence is where I live best. I was watching, waiting, and then one of her mistakes landed directly in my inbox. Betrayal speaks loudly in the smallest details. A week after Becky's email, I logged in to check the bare scraps of my remaining account. I wasn't expecting much. She'd already drained most of it. But what I didn't expect was a notification buried under routine spam. Your Amazon order has shipped. Amazon. The account we used for years. The one we'd shared for birthdays, Christmas gifts, all the little things that made us feel like a team. In her rush to erase me, Becky had forgotten one thing: unlinking me. I clicked. There it was, black and white, a list of purchases that didn't belong in our life. A leather sectional couch, a 75-inch television, designer cookware we'd never even talked about buying, thousands of dollars, and none of it headed to our house. The delivery address blinked up at me, unfamiliar. Not our home, not her sister's, somewhere else entirely. I felt the barracks dissolve around me, the laughter of soldiers, the hum of generators, it all vanished beneath the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. Becky hadn't just left me, she'd replaced me, and she was doing it with our money. I copied the address into a notepad, staring at it like it might confess something on its own. The street name meant nothing to me, but the meaning was clear. Someone else was in the picture. Someone living in the house that my money had furnished, sitting on a couch I had unknowingly paid for. The rage that surged up wasn't wild. It was sharp, precise. Every soldier learns how to channel adrenaline into calculation, and in that moment, I wasn't just a husband betrayed. I was an investigator, building a case piece by piece, waiting for the perfect moment to move. Her arrogance had left a trail, and that trail led straight to another man. She thought oceans and paperwork would shield her from consequence. She thought distance meant safety. But she hadn't considered what I had access to. War teaches patience, days of waiting for minutes of action. My revenge would follow the same rule. While Becky decorated her new life with my money, I started documenting everything. Each withdrawal, each charge, each shipment. The paper trail stretched like barbed wire, cutting into me with every line I copied down, but it was also a map, one that would eventually lead me straight to her undoing. At night, I sat on my bunk with a red notebook, filling it like a soldier filling an intel report, bank statements, credit card logs, that new address from Amazon. It all went in. If I couldn't act yet, I'd prepare, because preparation was action, the kind she wouldn't see coming. Still, even the sharpest knife needs a hand back home to wield it. That's when I reached out quietly to Mark. We'd served together before he rotated stateside. He owed me more than a few favors, and more importantly, he was loyal. The kind of loyal Becky had forgotten existed. I sent him the address. A week later, his message came through, clipped and clean. Becky was living there, with him, a coworker, some office suit who had slipped in while I was halfway across the world. Mark described the scene with soldier's precision. The new furniture arriving, the packages piling up, Becky and her new prize strolling into restaurants without a care. They weren't hiding. They were flaunting it, parading around on $60,000 I'd sweated into the soil of Afghanistan. The betrayal should have broken me. Instead, it hardened something inside. I felt the fury, yes, but I didn't let it spill. I didn't send messages. I didn't confront her. I let her believe she had won. That belief would be the rope she eventually hung herself with. In silence, I began to move money. Quietly, methodically. I rerouted my pay into an account she couldn't touch, a fortress she had no key to. Each deposit was another brick in the wall I was building between us. She thought she had gutted me, but with every dollar I redirected, I tightened the vice, let her shop, let her spend. Every empire built on theft eventually collapses under its own weight. Becky thought she drained me dry. She didn't realize I had just begun starving her out. Every story of betrayal has a third character, and I was ready to meet mine. Mark sent the photos at dawn, attached to a message that needed no explanation. There was Becky, stepping out of a car that wasn't ours, her hand brushing against a man's arm like they'd rehearsed the gesture 100 times. They were laughing, carefree, as if my years of service, my sweat, my sacrifices were just background noise to their little performance. I zoomed in on the man, mid-40s, decent suit, but the posture of someone trying to sell confidence he didn't own. His name came back quick. Michael, co-worker, the shadow that had been standing behind Becky long before I noticed the signs. At first I thought he was just the replacement, a man to fill the empty seat at my table, but Mark's intel ran deeper. Turns out Michael carried his own kind of baggage, failed marriages, whispers of gambling debts, a history of chasing quick highs and leaving wreckage behind. I should have felt anger that Becky chose him over me, but instead, a different feeling took root, clarity. She hadn't traded up, she'd traded down, fast. The house, the furniture, the fine dining. It wasn't love, it was a temporary high, built on stolen cash and a man already drowning. The real crack came when Mark dug up court records, bankruptcy, filed just 2 years prior. Michael wasn't a man building a future, he was a man clawing at the edges of survival. And Becky, in her arrogance, had lashed her new life to his sinking ship. I stared at those records under the flicker of a single barracks bulb, pages of his financial ruin spread out like a dossier, and for the first time since Becky's email, I almost smiled, because this wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was strategy. She thought she'd found security in his arms, but all she'd done was tie herself to a fuse already burning toward the powder keg. The photographs of them together, smug and comfortable, only fueled my resolve. They thought they were building a new life. I knew they were building a trap. When I stepped off that plane, I wasn't coming home as a husband. I was coming back as a strategist. The air at Bragg was thick with jet fuel and humidity, but after months of desert sand, it felt almost cleansing. Families lined the tarmac, wives and kids rushing into arms that hadn't held them in too long. I stood among them, anonymous in uniform, watching the reunions I no longer had waiting for me. Becky wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. And that was fine. I didn't need her tears or excuses. What I needed was a plan. So I kept my profile low. No social posts, no calls to mutual friends, no drop-ins on familiar streets. The first civilian office I stepped into wasn't hers. It was my attorney's. A man who specialized in military divorces, the kind of attorney who knew every corner of the regulations Becky had probably never even considered. He listened as I laid it all out. The withdrawals, the new address, the coworker named Michael. Then he leaned back and explained something that almost felt like the first breath I'd taken in months. Becky's spree wasn't just reckless. It was evidence. The bank drains, the furniture, the cohabitation, all of it painted her not as a victim, but as the aggressor. In the eyes of the court, she hadn't just abandoned me. She'd potentially forfeited every advantage she thought she held. That's when the mission shifted. No more just documenting for myself. Now, every page, every screenshot, every timestamp became part of a case. I pulled official records, bank statements signed in her name, shipment receipts linked to our joint account, photos Mark had captured of Becky and Michael crossing the threshold of that house like it was theirs. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled itself into something undeniable. It wasn't about proving betrayal anymore. It was about letting her choices collapse under their own weight. Still, there was something gnawing at me. Betrayal is messy, but it always leaves fingerprints. I dug deeper, past the obvious, past the surface-level greed, and into the fine print most people never think twice about. And that's when I found it. The one piece of evidence that turned betrayal into self-destruction. Sometimes justice doesn't need to be built, it hands itself to you. The credit card statement came in thick, a packet of numbers and lines Becky probably assumed I'd never see again. I flipped through it the way a soldier scans a map, looking for ambush points, and there it was. Charges that weren't furniture, weren't restaurants, weren't even Amazon, they were casino markers. Online betting transfers, cash advances from ATMs tucked inside gambling halls. My money, bleeding out into the void of Michael's vices. At first I thought it was just him, Michael, torching whatever scraps he could leech from her. But the deeper I read, the worse it got. Transactions in Becky's name, direct transfers into his accounts. She hadn't just enabled his habit, she'd joined it. My wife, the woman who once scolded me for buying a second-hand guitar, was now laundering my deployment pay through slot machines and poker tables. I felt a strange calm settle over me. Betrayal had already burned the house down. This wasn't just ashes. It was evidence. Becky had tied herself to Michael's debts so tightly, she might as well have welded the chains. And every withdrawal, every desperate swipe of that card left a paper trail straight back to her. The irony hit me hard. The money she stole to build her fantasy was the same rope she was hanging herself with. I didn't have to fabricate anything. I didn't have to twist the truth. She had done the work for me, scrawling her guilt across bank ledgers and casino receipts. I gathered each statement, each damning line item, into a separate folder, not to stare at and rage anymore, but to wield. This wasn't about heartbreak now. It was leverage. Cold, clean leverage. I remembered the desert silence, how I had swallowed my fury and waited. This was why. Patience had delivered me something sharper than anger, proof, and with proof came power. Becky thought she was clever, draining me while I fought a war oceans away. She thought she could build a new life with Michael on the ruins of mine, but she hadn't seen the bat, Leafield, for what it was. This wasn't her kingdom. It was her trap. With every dollar she stole, she'd signed her own downfall. Now all I had to do was push. I walked into that courtroom with nothing but silence, and silence was louder than her rage. Becky was already there, perched beside her attorney in a dress that screamed confidence she hadn't earned. She didn't look at me at first, too busy smirking at the gallery like she was already collecting sympathy. When her eyes finally met mine, she found no anger, no plea. Just the same expression I wore in combat briefings, unreadable, steady, immovable. Her lawyer opened with fire, painting me as the absent husband, the cold soldier who chose the army over his wife. I let him talk. Let Becky nod and dab fake tears like she was auditioning for an award. And then my attorney rose, and everything changed. We didn't come with speeches. We came with evidence. First, the withdrawals. 60,000 siphoned in neat, damning lines. Then the cohabitation records. Photographs of Becky and Michael crossing that threshold. Shipment receipts addressed to their new life. I watched the judge's pen pause mid-note. Becky shifted in her seat, her smile cracking. And then came the hammer blow, the gambling. Bank statements with her name tied to Michael's debts. Transfers she couldn't explain. Casino cash-outs that told a story she couldn't rewrite. Each page slid across the bench was a nail in the coffin she'd built with her own hands. Her lawyer stammered, tried to object, but the weight of the paper trail was heavier than his words. He leaned in to whisper, and I saw the panic ripple through Becky's face. This wasn't the script she had imagined. Michael had been subpoenaed, but he never showed. Cowardice or self-preservation? I didn't care. His absence only sharpened the picture. Becky standing alone, painted as reckless, deceitful, financially unstable. The opposite of the victim she had tried to play. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to gloat. All I did was sit there, hands folded, as her empire of lies collapsed one receipt at a time. By the time the judge looked up, Becky wasn't the woman who had drained my accounts and laughed in photographs. She was small, cornered, exposed. The gavel hadn't even struck, and I already knew I had won. Revenge isn't loud. It's the silence after a storm, when the betrayer finally hears nothing but their own collapse. The ruling came swift, like a blade slicing through months of tension. The judge's words fell heavy. Becky forfeited her claims to the house, Repayment of the drained accounts was ordered, and every debt tied to Michael's gambling spree now bore her name. No shared liability, no sympathy. Just the clean weight of accountability crashing down where it belonged. I didn't smile. I didn't even shift in my seat. I simply nodded once, the same way I'd acknowledge an order on the field. My war wasn't fought with bullets this time. It was fought with patience, evidence, and silence. Becky broke first. Her voice cracked into a scream that echoed through the wood-paneled chamber, shrill and frantic, as though volume might rewrite the judgment. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she shoved him away, mascara streaking as she begged, then cursed, then blamed. Every word made her smaller. Every outburst only carved her downfall deeper into the room. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out without a word. The courthouse steps were bathed in sunlight, cool air cutting across my face. Behind me, her cries still carried faintly through the walls, but out here, they were nothing more than noise. I didn't need to hear her anymore. Within months, Michael was gone. The same man she had gambled her future on vanished when the weight of debts and court orders closed in. He left her with the bills, the repossessions, the shame. Just another chapter in his trail of wreckage. Me? I rebuilt quietly. My pay flowed into the account she could never touch. My life moved forward with discipline, clarity, and a freedom sharper than vengeance. The strange thing was, there was no rush of triumph. No cheers, no fireworks. Just stillness. The same stillness I'd learned in the desert, the kind that follows chaos and gunfire. That's what revenge really is. Not the strike, not the roar, but the silence that follows when the betrayer finally realizes they've destroyed themselves. I never raised my voice. I never threw a punch. I never had to. Becky lost everything she tried to steal. I kept the only thing she could never touch, my dignity. I didn't need to destroy her. All I had to do was stand still and let her destroy herself.